Hi, this is Kelsey Fogowski for AP Gov 5-Minute Review, and in this segment we're going to be looking at free response questions for the AP Gov exam, otherwise known as FRQs. So what is an FRQ? An FRQ, as I just mentioned, stands for a free response question. And if you've taken other AP exams within the social studies field, you'll probably be less familiar with an FRQ in the sense that this is not a document-based question. You are not writing a long essay. You are not looking at sources. You're simply stating information based off of a question. And on the exam, you'll see 4 FRQs, and you'll have about 25 minutes per FRQ, or a total of 100 minutes. It is by far more than enough time, and there's no reason to ever really rush on an FRQ because they provide you such ample time, which is a really nice part of this. So this is the only writing component for the AP Gov exam. So the first thing that you want to do is, of course, know how many points there are in an FRQ. You'll notice that for each prompt, they will sometimes put a statement here, such as the power of the federal government relative to the power of the states has increased since the ratification of the Constitution. Okay, so that is your prompt here, and then you'll see that you'll have 2 questions, sometimes a little bit more. The first part, in Part A, asking you to describe the following provisions of the Constitution and explain how each has been used over time to expand federal power. So if you have to count the points there, so certainly you have to describe 2 provisions, so that's 2 points right there, and then explain on top of that for how each has been used over time to expand federal power. So right there in question A, you have a total of 4 points. And then in Part B, explain how one of the following has increased the power of the federal government relative to the power of the state government. So while this may look like just one provision here, you'll notice that this will actually be a total of 2 points in Part B because you have to explain. And typically when you have to explain, you not only just have to identify whether it's the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Civil Rights Act or Clean Air Act, but you also have to explain what that is and how it relates to the federal government in this question. So this one is actually worth 6 possible points. So it's very important that you know exactly what you have to do and how many parts there are. Now, of course, you want to pay close attention to these action words, the action words being here, describe in Part A as well as explain, and then also in Part B being explained. So make sure that when you see these words such as describe or explain, you're going to be elaborating. Again, not to the extent that you'll have on an essay, but certainly enough so that the FRQ reader knows that you understand these concepts. So as I just said, pay attention to that action word. Perhaps the best action word, in my opinion, to get points is the identification part, where it might say, identify a linkage institution. And all you have to do is state, for example, elections are an example of a linkage institution. That would get you a point. But if you see words like discuss, describe, explain, there's often something called the rule of 3, in which it's probably a safe bet to write at least 3 sentences, maybe 4 or 5, with an example. Again, at the end of the day, you want to keep it simple. You don't want to get too overly complicated. You want to really make sure that the AP Gov readers know that you know exactly what you are writing about. So don't try to get too complicated. Keep it simple. Final tips here, avoid being partisan in any of your responses. So for example, if they're going to ask you for an example of a political party, you wouldn't put, oh, the Republicans or the Democrats, which are a terrible party, or they have lackluster candidates. Remember at the end of the day that AP Gov is designed to be a political theory exam. It is not designed for you to put your partisan opinion in there. So stay neutral. Think of it as just a political theory examination. You also want to avoid numbering each part. For example, 1A, 1B, 1C. So for example, if in 1A you don't actually answer the question entirely correct, but let's say in 1C you do, you wouldn't actually get credit. So you want to just put number 1 and then answer the FRQ. You might want to space them out for Part A and Part B, but just in the chance that, what you may not answer in Part A actually is covered in Part C. Sometimes that can happen. You do want to, of course, avoid long-winded responses and stay positive. Nobody likes a negative Nelly, if you will. And of course, you want to agree with the AP test prompts because they are the ones writing it. So don't try to negate it because otherwise you probably won't be getting any points. And the final tip here is that you can only earn points on the AP Gov exam. So if you put, for example, identify a linkage institution and you put a school, which is not an example, but then you also put elections being an example of a linkage institution, so you put two, you only get credit for the election part. So you actually do not lose any points for putting schools down as a linkage institution. So keep that in mind. Sometimes you may want to overkill, and when it asks for one example, you might want to provide two just to be on the safe side. So again, follow these tips and you should be good for your AP Gov FRQ.